All right. First, thank you, John, for the introduction and for the honor of being here, despite maybe looking like I come from an enemy camp, especially after that comment about ASU. But we really, would love to be forging partnerships with New Mexico. So before I introduce the panels, or actually I'm going to have them introduce themselves, Jean asked me to talk a little bit first about what we're doing in Arizona. But you might say, well, why in the world am I here? I work in Arizona, but little known, well, number of people know I spent the majority of my career at Sand International Laboratories here in New Mexico. I still live in New Mexico, and I was actually born in New Mexico and spent the majority of my life living here over three different periods. So I have a very strong connection and love of New Mexico. And throughout my career, it's been a diversified career. It was mentioned in the last panel about not necessarily staying with where you got your degree. I think Jennifer mentioned that. And my career is an example of taking your foundation and taking it into a lot of different areas. So one of the things I wanted to talk about a little bit is what we're doing in Arizona, because we have set up a statewide entity that we call a Center for an Arizona Carbon Neutral Economy. It is rather unique in the state in that it brings together and was founded by 4 energy utilities in the state and the 3 universities. And in addition, permanent members on our governance board, so we have a formal governing board, those 7 entities plus the Navajo Nation and the Arizona Commerce Authority, which is a state agency for economic development. And then we bring together lots of stakeholders. So it was mentioned in the last panel, so many great things mentioned. I can't even think of all. I would be up here probably talking for half an hour if I keyed off of everything I heard between Representative Dixon's amazing keynote. Was that amazing, folks? Followed by an equally amazing panel. So I was scribbling feverishly throughout that panel. So we find ourselves being a convening body and drawing on, once you put those 9 entities together, you can reach anybody. You have networks that expand to everybody you need to get to. And as Meredith, Representative Dixon mentioned, and I say this frequently, what we're trying to accomplish here in the clean energy transition or in transitioning to carbon neutral manufacturing is requiring unprecedented collaboration. So we find that with the core that we have, we can pull together, convene all of the stakeholders in the state and have a lot of influence. One of the things that we do is, as I mentioned, we have a formal governing body. We have formal, meetings twice monthly, and we keep minutes and we track action items. So one thing that was mentioned in the prior panel was it takes funding oftentimes to bring people together and get them working, and aligning priorities can sometimes, you're going to follow the money. Well, we have been fortunate. We're funded by the utilities and the state of Arizona and our industry partners. So we do have some funding, but it isn't the funding that matters for us in getting things done. It is having clear and accountable actions and something we're really trying to accomplish. So it's the projects that we set up, and our governing board decides on what those are. So our projects or activities, whatever you want to call them. So we host workshops statewide. We host roundtables, typically virtual. And we've done I think about 70 to date of the virtual workshop roundtables, where we have just a different discussion topic for each one. We have in-person roundtables for the more controversial topics. It was mentioned in the other panel, the first panel, that there's no substitute for face-to-face, especially, and I will say that's true, especially for controversial issues. And one of the things we're really trying to do is promote dialogue and not avoid the difficult conversations. We work to bring all perspectives together. And to Charlie's point on energy and security, with all of our products of trying to put together resources, we look to, one, create unbiased, factual information, hopefully that can be trusted, and considers at least what we consider talk about as 4 basic lenses: the environmental lens, the economic lens, the security and resilience, and then the social equity and justice. And those 4 lenses, you find when you start looking at almost anything we do in this energy space or in industrial activities, there's going to be trade-offs. There are no perfect solutions. So trying to get, and think through the right balance of those 4. So with that, I am going to turn to my esteemed panelists, who are an amazing group, and they're going to key off, I'm sure, of the last panel, because there's a lot of, it's a different lens. You heard it more from the universities and the national labs. Now you're going to hear from a different set of stakeholders on partnerships. So I am going to ask each of my panelists one by one. It's random order how they happen to sit down, and to talk about, one, introduce themselves and their connection to this panel and the goals of this panel. And then to also talk about how their organization supports partnerships and collaboration in New Mexico's energy sector, and what their main goals are. So first, I'll start with Laurie.
Thank you. Good morning. Thank you guys for traveling all the way here in the really crazy weather. I know I'm at P&M, Public Service Company in New Mexico in Albuquerque. And I know all across the state, we really are seeing a lot of impacts from this storm. So appreciate everybody coming, but I know safety is of the utmost importance as you're driving later. I understand the storm will be continuing, so please make sure you're watching out for that. So my name is Laurie Williams. I'm at Public Service Company of New Mexico. My role there right now is Vice President of Integrated Planning, which sounds like, I always say, some kind of Dilbert speak. What does that even mean, right? So in my role, I am responsible for planning the grid for our system in New Mexico. And inside of that is planning what our resources will be, whether they're supply side or demand side resources, planning to meet our load and our forecasts for the next 10 and 20 years, planning the transmission system, where we're going to put lines, how we support the system, how we keep it reliable, and now responsibility for the entire distribution system planning as well, which is, if you guys have been following the news, know we are engaged in grid modernization. That is a filing we just got approval for to try to modernize our distribution system. Really exciting things happening at really every level of the utility. And all of it is around our goal to try to become carbon-free by 2040. So I don't know that if everyone in the room knows, but there was a couple of years ago something called the Energy Transition Act passed in New Mexico. And that requires our utilities in New Mexico to become carbon-free by 2045. So at P&M, we are attempting to try to get there 5 years early, which is easier said than done for any of you familiar with grid operations and reliability. That is going to be a tall order, but we are proud to say we are 65% carbon neutral already today. That is where we stand today. And by 2026, we'll be around 75% carbon free. So really a lot of work has gone in at the utility over the last several years. And I can tell you, we have put on more renewable resources in the last few years than generation we've built in the entire history of the company, which is 100 years prior. So significant amounts of collaboration have been required to make that happen. And so in my role, I think one of the things I want to highlight is we have a lot of open stakeholder processes. So anyone who is not familiar with utility planning, all of the major investor-owned utilities in the state are required to have open planning processes. So not today, but normally, we have an open planning process. We have weekly, monthly meetings where we take folks through what we're up to. People bring questions, people bring suggestions to us. It's called our biweekly stakeholder meeting. So anyone that's participated in our integrated planning efforts in the past is invited to participate in that. Every 3 years, that process is sort of reset. So we go through a process every 3 years of making our plans collaboratively with anyone who wants to show up and help us do it. And that includes consumer groups, environmental advocacy groups, regulators, staffs, trade organizations, national labs. I really can't think of a group that we have not interacted with and collaborated with across the state. I've got a list of folks that we normally are working with, but I would like to invite everybody in this room. We have a website that is dedicated to this integrated planning effort. And again, fully public. We have out there every bit of material that we have shared with the public over the last several years. We have recordings of every meeting that we have held. All of this is publicly available. And the point of that is, I think, and somebody said it earlier, it is going to take every person in this room, every person involved in the energy industry, not just folks at utilities anymore. That's kind of the old way it happened. But to try to get that last, I'll call it the last mile, to get from 75% up to 100% carbon free is a very challenging task that's going to take experts in academia, experts at our national labs, experts from development companies, people who are putting their time and effort into emergent technology development, environmental advocates, environmental justice. This is not cheap. Right? I know the fuel is free, but the amount of infrastructure that's required to incorporate renewables is significant. I give the example that for every megawatt of fossil fuel-based resource I shut down, I have to build 3 to 5 megawatts of new resource. So that means I have to build 3 to 5 megawatts of new infrastructure to carry that energy and or store that energy at different times on the grid. So it is causing every utility across the globe to think about their system differently and to have to construct quite a bit of infrastructure to carry that amount of new power and new resources going all over the place and coming from places that we have not traditionally gotten resources. So some of the ones I'll name, environmental advocacy groups. I think we've got the Four Corners Energy Alliance here. But one of the big ones we work with, and I talk to probably every week, is Western Resource Advocates. And what I would tell anyone trying to put together a group and find funding to be involved in this space is there are so many groups out there that are very well funded that as you are getting up to speed and as you are trying to find those entry points into this industry or into the area of passion that you want to follow and contribute to, there are so many out there. So Western Resource Advocates is one. We work very closely with the Coalition for Clean and Affordable Energy, Renewable Energy Industry Association of New Mexico, which is RIA New Mexico. All of these have websites and are very open to folks coming, learning, trying to participate with them. Consumer advocate organizations. We work with the Attorney General and now called the Department of Justice, but I think more people go, oh, Attorney General, I know what that is. But the DOJ is our consumer advocate, one of our consumer advocates in the state that's helping to make sure affordability is front and central. The Affordable Reliable Energy Alliance is another one that we're very active with. Sierra Club, the Interwest Alliance. Interwest Alliance represents generation developers all across the West. So folks who are trying to get and break into wind development, into solar development, into large battery energy storage development, et cetera. That is a great one. The New Mexico Solar Energy Association, and there are so many more. I think once you start interacting with some of these groups, and primarily for students who may not have a lot of exposure in the industry, I think these are all really great places to start. Agencies, we have a really, really good public regulation commission in place right now. Really active. They've spent a lot of time putting together public forums and workshops where you're hearing about grid modernization, or you're hearing about energy efficiency, or you're hearing about regional power markets, those kinds of things. They really are putting a lot of effort into trying to make sure we're educating one another, that they, as the regulatory body in the state, are aware of and part of all of that decision making. And that is all open meeting. Those meetings occur every 2 weeks on Thursdays at 10 a.m. Mountain Prevailing Time, and they're available on YouTube. So if you go to the New Mexico Public Regulation Commission website, click right on their page, they'll have it on their front page, open meetings every 2 weeks. Same thing with the Energy, Minerals, and Natural Resources Department. I think you guys are going to hear from the Secretary Designate tomorrow, who is outstanding. I think if you have not seen her speak, she's going to blow your socks off. She is fantastic and brings just a wealth of information from her background in energy and really global and geopolitical implications for energy as well. So she's fantastic, and her department is very active and looking at, she'll talk to you guys about this tomorrow, but a quadrennial energy plan for the state of New Mexico that she would develop collaboratively with workshops all across the state. I saw Charlie Hanley here somewhere. We work significantly with Sandia National Labs and Los Alamos, but Sandia, we are right now, I can't name all of the projects that we are using Sandia for, but some of the big ones are, I think Charlie mentioned wildfire. That is an enormous kind of thing I've got to think about as trying to plan the resilience of the system, make sure that the system is prepared for extreme events. And again, whether those are physical, we've had a lot of attacks on the electric grid in the US, not PNM specifically, so no panic, but a lot of attacks on the electric grid recently. So really thinking through, and you may see if you drive by our West Mesa substation, we've had to put up a 14-foot ballistics proof wall around that sub, for example, because of those kinds of things that will protect it from both man-made and natural events. Machine learning. They have helped us, Sandia helped us with our emergent technology evaluation. So in our integrated resource plan for resources, we get a lot of technologies that are unproven bidding into our RFI, because we go out, we look 20 years into the future to try to figure out what resources we should put on the grid and what mix. So Sandia has helped us evaluate all those with technology readiness scores. We're part of a Kirtland substation situational awareness sensor. So they're doing some security work, and we're allowing them to use one of our substations to do that sensoring and evaluating traffic in and around the I can't say too much, I'm getting down the road too far, in and around the base. Our downtown network, I don't know if anyone's familiar with the PNM downtown network, but we've had a real problem in letting folks, customers, host their own generation behind the meter. Our downtown network is really an unusual piece of our grid, and it's been really technologically challenging because of the age of that network and the design and the very little bit of load that it has on it. So it's hard to reliably host behind the meter solar there, but we know our customers want to do that. Sandia Labs is helping us with protection schemes and other things that will help us increase the amount of hosting capability we have there. We were part of and spoke at their power electronics conference. So Sandia put that on a couple of weeks ago. We sit on something called an external advisory board. So Sandia is actually soliciting us for the kinds of things in the energy space that we need those research projects for. And that has been very, very helpful to us and continues to bring us black start simulations, for example, for black start scenarios across the Southwest. For anyone who doesn't know what black start, that means when the grid goes down, you can't just turn it back on. You have to piece it back together, stabilize frequency, do all that kind of stuff. Not easy, but to simulate that and to make sure that we're prepared as a region for those kinds of events, they've helped. Operations, technology, cybersecurity, the list goes on and on. Our universities, for any students, we do have internships. Every year we hire 10 engineering interns in my groups. And 3 of those are specifically for indigenous students. So we collaborate with the tribes very heavily, trying to make sure that we are supporting students in those communities to make sure we are getting representation in our engineering areas that really represent the communities that we're serving. And remaining engineering students from all 3 of our universities, you'll find us at every career fair, probably right next to the Sandia Labs and Los Alamos desks. But love having those students because I think showing kids about the energy industry, especially at a time when it is just exploding with innovation and is so interesting. And there is a niche for everybody. It's a really nice opportunity to be able to offer. We support at New Mexico State something called the Electric Utility Management Program. So we basically endow that program. And it is a master's degree program for electrical engineering students, specifically targeted at power engineering. So from power electronics to all the way to the economics and those kinds of things that unfortunately are a part of so many of our engineering careers. We've got to know finance a lot more than we wish we had to. So, and lastly, I'll say a plug for the professional and trade organizations. One of the places that we do a lot of our research as an industry is through the Electric Power Research Institute. So there is an organization that's a really sophisticated R&D function that not every utility, but most utilities in the United States separately fund. So they do things from demonstrating advanced conductors. So we're right now looking at carbon core conductor, which is a low sag, high temperature conductor that we can use on transmission lines to help increase capacity without increasing size and sag, which is good for a lot of reasons. It's a lot lighter, fewer losses, those kinds of things. But we're engaged with those kinds of R&D organizations that are helping us to define those kinds of opportunities. And then lastly, things like IEEE, probably near and dear to a lot of people's hearts in this room, the National Association Transmission Forum we are part of, EEI, Edison Electric Institute, which is a policy organization. So as you guys can see, if you want to be part of the electric industry, there are a million entry points for that. And I feel like every kind of lens is available for folks depending on what your passion and your focus and where you want to make a contribution. So very happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Laurie, for all those great insights and great information. And I will say, I will echo the point of, getting to carbon neutral is the challenge. We might be able to get 75%, 80%, and then what? And that was really the impetus of, forming the center that we did in Arizona. And great introduction to the, the utility market. That's what I've been learning a lot about working with the utilities. So thank you, Laurie. Let's now turn to Fayth.
Hey, good morning. Is that caught up? Okay. I am Fayth Gilepsy, and I'm in actually kind of a unique role sitting here today. I'm a public affairs consultant. I own a consulting firm where wholly woman-owned, woman-operated, and all 3 of my consultants are females. We're very, very proud of that, especially being in energy. We have 3 main industry focuses that our consultants face, and it's energy, agriculture, and education. All three of my ladies, myself included, they have a foot in at least two industries. And so what we really do all the time, and I say, we're just in the business of making connections. We're in the business of plugging people in the right places where they need to be. Because you heard Dr. Sullivan talk about the energy career fair that we hosted last week at Las Cruces Public Schools, or at NMSU with Las Cruces Public Schools. That's a project I've been working on for 6 years, priming the right people, getting the right partners engaged, preparing leadership to take 3,000 kids onto the NMSU campus that is wide open, right? These are not small projects that we work on, but through our client network and then through all of the other partners that we work with, we have the right players at the table. We just have to connect them. So today, Jean has asked me to represent one of my clients, which is the Permian Energy Development Lab. And we have a handful of, we say PEDAL, that's the acronym. We've got a handful of PEDAL folks here that you're going to hear from today and tomorrow. So I'm really going to talk about the organization today, like as a whole. PEDAL is a 501c3. But as Dr. Sullivan already prefaced, we are currently chasing the $160 million grant from the National Science Foundation. That grant will be for advanced energy research in the Permian Basin. And that's not just one physical facility, but hopefully many physical research laboratories in the Permian. The other two kind of main pillars of PEDAL, besides the research, is community development and workforce development. All three of these things are really pivotal. And I think that where I see the reason that I took PEDAL as a client and why I believe so much in it is I don't want to see Lovington, Hobbs, Carlsbad become ghost towns in 50 or 100 years, right? I want to make sure that the Permian communities, especially, I'm a little biased, especially on the New Mexico side, but also on the Texas side, that they continue to thrive, that my children, grandchildren, or great-grandchildren could have an energy career in the Permian Basin, even if it's not the traditional energy career that we know to be in the Permian right now.
Thanks.
Thank you, Fayth. Those great dimensions. Okay, Jolante, please.
Thanks. So my name is Jolante van Wijk, and I work at Los Alamos National Laboratory. And I'm here in the role of program manager. And in my program management portfolio are projects related to subsurface energy. So that is geothermal energy, hydrogen, but also fossil energy, and carbon management, and several other aspects. But I'm not here today to talk about these projects or our research projects. I'm on this panel to talk more about two Department of Energy funded and initiated initiatives that the Department of Energy has started to make energy transition more just, and also to be able to successfully continue it. The first project that I want to talk about is called the Rapid Response Team. In this country, there are 6 rapid response teams. And these rapid response teams, the name already says it, they have been formed to help communities that are going through energy transition at the moment to deal with the impacts of the energy transition. So think about if you close a coal power plant in an area, and perhaps also the accompanying coal mine, that many people will lose their job. These are often middle-class jobs. So people are immediately without an income and without health insurance. So the rapid response teams are developed to help communities deal with these impacts. Then the second initiative that I wanted to bring up is called iWest, and that is a initiative that focuses on the Intermountain West region. So the 6 states that make up the Intermountain West region. This is a longer-term program in which we bring different stakeholders associated with energy transition in contact with each other. So you can think about the communities here and the sovereign nations, but also the states, industry, investors, and universities and colleges. Energy transition will involve the need to re-educate our energy workforce. And several universities and community colleges in the Intermountain West region have in the past year successfully developed reschooling programs and certificate programs. So it's a longer term project, the Intermountain West project or iWest project, but it helps communities prepare and respond to these energy transitions in a longer time scale.
Thank you very much for those. I think you're starting to see the really wonderful range of diversity on this panel. Matthew.
Good morning. I am not nearly as qualified as the three speakers before me to be up here, but I'm grateful to be here. My name is Matthew Gonzales. I am the executive director for the Four Corners Clean Energy Alliance. We are a 501c4 nonprofit organization that was established last year on the Navajo Nation with really one focus. As this energy transition happens, how do we ensure that those tribal communities which have not been brought to the table in the past have a seat at the table, but also have a voice while sitting at that table? We look at the past traumas that have happened when it comes to things like uranium development and even coal mining to a certain extent. It has impacts on communities. We're more aware now than we've ever been. We realize that some of the things we did 50 years ago, 100 years ago weren't right for the environment. It wasn't right for workers. And so we're more conscious of that. And so we try to bring together those diverse groups of stakeholders, both tribal organizations, tribal leaders, local county leaders, local municipal leaders. We try to bring all of those people together to have these conversations about how each region can play an integral role in this energy transition. Now, I actually hate the term energy transition. I think it's more of an energy evolution. If you look at charts from the Energy Information Administration, they still say that we're going to be using oil and gas and coal and these things in the future. The way we use them will be much different, but these energy types aren't going away. And I think we do ourselves a disservice when we mislead and we tell people that we're transitioning away from stuff, because we're not. We're just transitioning in the way that we use it. I'd also be remiss. I've got a few board members actually here in the audience today. Well, I got one in the audience and one on the panel. So Dr. Ellen Stechel serves on our board of directors. She serves as our secretary. I also have our chairman, Mr. Steve Gray, standing back there. Steve, will you raise your hand? And then sitting next to him is his better half. Steve married up, but Steve is here with Rose, and she keeps Steve in line and makes sure that he's doing his job as chairman. And then something else I wanted to point out is Steve and one of our other board members, Derek Watchman, they're working on an event for February that will be based around energy. So there'll be more details on that, but happy to share that information as they start to sort it out and kind of what that will look like. But wanted to just make note of that. But yeah, we're really, really excited to be in this space. Just a little background on myself. I've had the privilege of serving as a mayor, as a city councilman, and as a school board member. So I understand what rural America faces. I understand the challenges that we have. And I also understand that, frankly, we have never had a seat at the table. It doesn't matter if it's tribal or rural. If you're building a transmission line, a pipeline, broadband, it all runs through rural America. But too often, developers will come into those areas, not consult the local community. And then people have this animosity towards those projects, when in reality, if you come in and you take the time to sit down with them, talk with them about their projects. What I've learned is a lot of times people just want to complain. They want to complain a little bit about the things that scare them, the things that worry them. And as soon as they get that off their chest, all of a sudden they're feeling warm and welcome to the idea of what the potential holds with bringing these jobs to their communities. So community engagement is so important. I would tell you that companies, it doesn't matter the industry, companies, industry, universities, even nonprofits, we all suck at doing outreach, but we can all continue to work on it. We can all continue to work together. We can all do these partnerships, find ways to bring people in. I mean, I can't thank the New Mexico Tech team enough. This is the second time I've got to participate in one of their events. And this is what we have to do. We have to work with those allies out there that are singing our same song and trying to raise awareness on how our kids, how our communities, how everyone can play a part in this. The other thing I would add is that we've got a brain drain here in New Mexico. We're talking about advanced technologies. We're talking about hydrogen, carbon capture. These are all jobs that our kids can be in. And so part of that and part of the responsibility on us is to, one, tell our story to each other so that we know how we can work together, but also make sure that our youth are informed on these opportunities, or that we don't need them to go to Phoenix or Denver or Dallas. It's nice if they want to, but I want to keep them right here in New Mexico. I'm tired of shipping out our best and brightest. And so we take very seriously that opportunity to bring those diverse stakeholder groups together, to make sure that we are a voice for the indigenous communities, for the rural communities. And again, just making sure that people understand that we want to be part of this conversation. Invite us to the table. We'll be more than happy to participate. Thanks.
Well, thank you all for all the great range of perspectives. We're going to move into some little bit more detailed. Some of the points have already been made. I do want to, say, echo that, working with other organizations like EPRI, we work with a lot and bringing, but very importantly, that point that Matthew was just making, that inclusivity, that seat at the table, that voice being heard, that voice being respected, that voice being seen in actions is so important. And to the end of the 160 million, I presume Fayth was talking about the NSF engines. We do have, we won in the first round in Arizona. It's actually Arizona, Utah, and Nevada on sustainability. It has an energy, a water, and a carbon management pillar. And we're competing against you guys for minerals mining one in Arizona, which is also involves all the universities. But these innovation corridors, I mean, what NSF is doing, I mean, it's really economic development. It is something that NSF this is really pushing them in new directions. And I think it's probably because their director came from ASU. So, all right. So let's see. So I'm going to direct this next question to Fayth to start off. So how, and some of these points were made, but please build on how can consortiums, trade associations, other stakeholder groups, and those include government, industry, academia, better align their efforts to expand energy technology in the state while avoiding duplication and achieving our shared goals?
Absolutely. Well, I mean, the first example is Ellen already said that we're competing against the same dollars and we haven't fist fought yet. So it's possible. No, this is a really big challenge, right? Because we have so many organizations, whether they're in, they could be a trade association. That's the world that I come from. They might be a grassroots organization, they're coalitions, even if they're not formal, right? How do we all talk to each other and play nice with each other so that way we're moving together, right? The rising tide lifts all ships, but we have to be willing to be open and honest. And there are a lot of I consider them like coalitions of coalitions where the leaders of these different organizations do come together and have conversations. But I think it's not something that we do enough of. We tend to hold our projects close to our chest and we don't really want to share because I'm worried, what if I tell Laurie she's going to steal it and make it her idea? Well, if I trust Laurie, she's going to say, Fayth, how can I help you? And that's what we as consortium members, no matter what consortium we're in, we need to be saying, right? Because if it's my idea or if it's Laurie's idea and I didn't think of it myself, I probably don't have the bandwidth to do it. So be realistic, right, with yourself and say, my trade association, my consortium, they don't have the bandwidth to take on this project, but you know what we do have the bandwidth to do? Support Laurie. And we're going to do that, right? And this is something that's easy. It's easier said than done, right? Because we as humans, we don't really instinctively trust someone that we don't know, right? And so you kind of have to dig deep and say, I'm trusting that this person is going to do the best that they possibly can by me. And sometimes we get burned, but more often than not, we create an ecosystem and a culture that is advancing everyone together. Matt and I share rural roots, and we both share the passion that people in rural areas, especially farmers and ranchers, have not had a seat at the table when they needed to. And simply bringing in those people, right? They have their own associations and organizations. So not always collaborating with the organizations that look like yours, but also the ones that don't look like yours. when you're starting, everyone kind of, I talk about this in nonprofits all the time. I do a lot of philanthropy work. Everyone wants to have their own nonprofit. Everyone wants to have their own foundation. That's a lot of work, like realistically. So how can you, if you're thinking of starting a consortium or starting a group, do your due diligence and see what the landscape is, right? Is there another organization out there that's already doing this work? And if they are, maybe consider throwing your weight behind that to make it stronger, right? So we're not diluting each other's efforts and we're empowering each other. Again, easier said than done, right? But it really kind of comes down to you have to trust the people around you. And I think that if we all have the ultimate goal, if our ultimate goal is to advance our communities, we should be able to trust each other.
Wow.
I'll get off my soapbox now. Thank you very much.
Thank you for those incredible points. But I will say, you know, in terms of building trust, and building trust is what's so important and with the communities, but events like this and sitting together and the networking. So thank you so much, New Mexico Tech, for bringing people together, because that's how trust is built as well. Wonderful. So before we do move on, I'm going to invite, does anyone else on the panel want to add to that? I mean, Fayth nailed it, but I'm sure there's more to add if anybody wants to chime in. No, not seeing any. Guess covered that. Let me see. I have to get down to. Okay, so let's move on now to, I mean, we've been touching around it, but more specifically, community needs and the impact of the energy transition. So I'm going to address this question to Jolante. What are the needs of communities for transitioning? And you talked a little bit, but if you can amplify on the needs of communities for transitioning to alternative energy sources and how that energy transition is impacting them quite directly.
Thank you. I think I'll start with trying to understand the impact on communities of the energy transition. So I think through the many initiatives that have been started in the last years, and the work that the Department of Energy is funding through like iWest, the Rapid Response Team that focuses on the Four Corners area, we are starting to get a picture of how communities are being impacted. And a clear impact can be loss of employment or changes in employment. Again, when a power plant, a coal power plant closes, a community may lose its entire middle class income source. With that come other losses, including health insurance. If there's no opportunity, or perhaps the opportunity comes too late to reschool or re-educate these often really well qualified workers and engineers, people may decide to move away. And what we've seen in some places in the Four Corners area is that communities have broken up because families have decided to move away, sometimes after having lived there for generations. So that brings me then to addressing the needs. There's a lot of funding. There has been a lot of funding made available in the past years by the Biden administration, for example, on helping communities maneuver through energy transition. But communities need people to be able to write successful grants. And so without a successful grant writer, that money is not really available to the community. So we have identified a couple of needs that are very specific in which we can help them. Another example is helping communities make the right choice for perhaps alternative energy resources. So this means that communities need to have the technological knowledge to make informed decisions. They need to understand how the economics of their communities are going to be impacted. And during the first panel, somebody, actually Jennifer mentioned this, the educational part here is extremely important. Communities need to have that full body of knowledge to make informed decisions. So there's many practical aspects that we can help these communities with.
Absolutely. So thank you for adding that dimension to the conversation. The workforce development can't be more important. And it's great in New Mexico that you have, an industry that can pivot more easily. It's interesting because I keep looking at similarities and differences between the two states, New Mexico and Arizona. Arizona is not an energy state. So the workforce development is a little bit more significant, but still a lot of the same impacted communities and challenges and these types of activities are really very helpful.
One more thing, I just wanted to give an example of response by universities and community colleges to this energy transition. So New Mexico Tech, for example, has initiated a geothermal energy certificate. And San Juan College in the northwestern part of the state has a whole series of these certificates. So that helps workers to quickly re-educate themselves and move forward.
Excellent. So I'm going to ask you, Matthew, to do two things. One, because I'm sure you'll want to build on some of what Jolante just talked about, but also can you address some of the biggest barriers or challenges when doing community engagement, specifically in tribal communities? I think you touched on it, but can you amplify?
Yeah, I mean, here in the West, our states are massive. And so we've got these big, huge regions, and every region has a different view and perspective on what they want to do in their region. Some areas where I live in Northeast New Mexico, we're really wanting to bring back the timber industry. We see some real opportunities there for things like biochar. We see opportunities with carbon capture. You get over in the Four Corners area, they're trying to find ways to retool those workers from their mines. Trying to find ways to retool workers from the oil and gas industry. How do they play a part in this new and emerging hydrogen industry? So I think part of it is that we've got these really big states. So I'll touch on a few points. One, we've got really big states and we've got a lot of diverse regions. And I think part of this, so one thing that we talk about is respecting tribal sovereignty, right? We should always respect tribal sovereignty and their abilities to make decisions for themselves. Part of that means letting them find a way to be a part of this energy transition or to use energy in the ways that they see fit. And so part of that too, though, is also being able to communicate about these new technologies that are coming down the pipe. So I'll speak specifically like on Navajo Nation. We've got a lot of Navajos who you can go and you can have a wonderful conversation with them. But we've got a lot of elders that are now on the nation that you've seen a lot of your youth move out. Of the 400,000 Navajos that exist in the world, about 170,000 of them live on the nation. And a lot of them are elders and they feel like they're losing their language. They feel like they're losing their land base, their culture. And so there's a real emphasis on trying to ensure that we create jobs in that region so that they can stay there and they can raise their kids around their family. The Navajo language is not one that's largely written. It's mostly spoken. And so it's imperative that we ensure that they have jobs so they can again, raise their kids there and come back. I mean, I talk to elders all the time that want their kids to come back. But the other part to that too, though, is we have elders that don't speak English. We have elders that are fluent in Navajo. And so it's important for us as an organization. We made it a point to go out and hire Navajo speakers, fluent Navajo speakers, not Matt Gonzales Spanglish, where half of it's English, half of it's Spanish, but actual Navajo speakers that the only words you hear them mention in English is Four Corners Clean Energy Alliance. Everything else is in Navajo. And so it's important to be able to message to them to help them understand what's happening in this world of energy. I think that's one of the major barriers is communicating to these communities in a language that suits them. The other part to that, though, is there's a lot of people, the DOE is doing it, New Mexico Tech's doing it, our universities doing it. They're putting out videos, they're putting out content, but we don't have enough. So that's another one of those barriers that I don't have enough information to point to say, you want to learn more about carbon capture, go watch this video. Or it's a really good video, but maybe it's not in the language that they need. So we've got some of those barriers where we're trying to create content ourselves, looking at what some of your federal agencies, your state agencies are doing to educate on those topics, what your universities are doing, and then trying to translate that so that we can help these communities understand that material. Something specific on the Navajo language too is there's certain words that we use in everyday language that aren't words within Navajo culture. So we've actually had to go out and work with the Medicine Man Association to create words. It's not like Spanish where you can, one person can read it and be like, oh, I think this is this is the derivative of it. I mean, we're talking about actually creating language, which is something I fully didn't understand until we took on this role. So I think those are some of the big barriers. Is one, we got to make sure that that we're respecting the autonomy of these regions and helping them embrace energy in the way that they see fit, communicating to them in their language. And then the last thing I want to touch on is again, having that seat at the table. There's a lot of opposition out there towards development. There's a lot of people that make a lot of money just saying no. Now, what's hard about that is there are real people within your communities that have real concerns and they're saying no. And so you got to kind of weed that out to say, okay, well, this person over here, their concern is genuine. This person's over here. They may just be saying no because their funders want them to say no. And that's tough because as we navigate this energy transition, it's going to require us to create environmental pathways that are achievable. Ellen touched on this. We've got to go after things that are achievable. And right now, we can't just be pie in the sky. And no disrespect to the politicians, but and I say that as a politician, sometimes it's easy to oversimplify what we're doing. The things that we are actually going to do in this energy transition happen in fine detail, in black and white. It's very nuanced. And so it's not always as simple as, oh yeah, we're going to do the energy transition. We're going to be to complete carbon neutral by this date. But there's a lot of steps in there that are going to have to happen. And so I don't think there's a shortage of barriers. And that's why it's critical for us to continue to work together, to be at the table together. Every time I come to one of these meetings, I joke, I'm the mayor of New Mexico. I know everybody everywhere. When I go in a room and I don't know you, I'm like, okay, well, where did you come from? But on top of that, it lets me know that I don't know everyone yet. And for someone who knows most people, it tells me there's a lot of people interested in this. And so we got to continue to cultivate. We got to continue to have these meetings. We're going to do this again next year, and we need to see new faces. We need to make sure we're bringing people along with us. We can't talk about this enough. So I'll stop there.
And that is an interesting new dimension. So important is to recognize the language barriers. And it isn't just, Navajo versus English. There's language barriers between different sectors. There's language barriers between different disciplines. We always find language barriers, language issues create barriers that we have to get over, right? So, okay, thank you so much for those great insights. So now we're going to talk a little bit more about opportunities, collaboration, and growth more specifically, and growth in the energy sector. And I guess maybe energy evolution rather than energy transition, we might call it. So, Laurie, this is, I think this one's for you. Where do you see the biggest opportunities for growth within New Mexico? I think, again, you touched on it, but for New Mexico's energy technology sector. And are there specific areas? I mean, you talked a lot about collaboration, which was so great, but also how we can make collaboration drive even faster progress.
I think that's great. I think, again, I'll echo everyone's comments on this, that collaboration is the key here. I think when you get in a room, we figure out that we have more common ground than not. And just having the patience and the trust to go through and figure out where that common ground is. For this question, I would say it would probably be easier to say areas where there's not need. I know I hire a lot of engineers. And one of the things that's really, really difficult is finding folks that will move to New Mexico. I know we've got the brain drain. We're really working hard to try to make sure our kids have opportunities here, getting them in early, as I talked about before in our internships. We have a rotational engineering program that lets kids try out different departments across the company to figure out what really speaks to them and where their skill set would be the most useful. Areas that I see significant challenge is in controls and communications, not to be so very specific here, but controls and communications engineering to me is absolutely imperative in this paradigm. As you get thousands and tens of thousands of devices all microprocessor based for the most part out there. We're really moving away from electromechanical analog kinds of devices. You have to have folks who really understand how to network those together, how to make sure that our devices are talking to each other. As everything becomes more smart, folks are putting smart inverters on their homes, right? So those inverters have to talk to our substations, which have to talk to our control centers, so that we understand every 4 seconds is basically what we sample the grid at, to understand where things are, to ensure that we're keeping the grid safe and public safety safe. Those kinds of jobs are really critical, to put fiber networks out there, to make control systems, program those so that inverters are doing what they're supposed to do when they're supposed to do it. So hold voltages, right? Make sure they're responding to frequency changes, those kinds of things. All really, really important. Transmission and distribution planners. I think there is enormous amounts of opportunity for folks with expertise in grid operations and being able to simulate those things and simulate the wide variety of conditions that occur on the grid. If you ever have seen the NERC, the North American Electric Reliability Corporation, it puts out all the rules for reliability and cybersecurity on the grid. There are about 1,200 individual specific rules about that. And folks with expertise in how to make these systems work, and work when you have variable energy resources and energy limited resources, people whose devices you don't control trying to contribute or take away from that grid, becomes imperative. I think we can't make the energy evolution work without these skill sets. So, and I see not as many kids going into these skill sets as I've seen in the past. We have a really hard time even getting a single applicant for some of these jobs, and they are high paying jobs. So we've worked with CNM in Albuquerque to try to come up with curriculums that would be helpful here. Trying to spend time, we are put our engineers on helping master's degree students, especially at New Mexico State, to guide them in their projects and what would be good projects, and helping them develop those skill sets and exposing them to all of this. I think those are really some of the major things I can think of. Skilled craft personnel. I think many of our high school students don't understand you don't have to go to college and have a really high paying job. Linemen, I don't know if you guys have heard of the SunZia project. It's a high voltage DC transmission line being built from right here in Corona, New Mexico out to Arizona. They are using 2,000 skilled linemen to construct that transmission line. That is I went out to their site, which is truly feels like you're in the middle of nowhere. You're driving and you're going, am I going to arrive at this thing? Where is this thing? And there are hundreds of vehicles out there. There are thousands of people on site for these project managers, electricians, linemen, all kinds of skill sets. And these kinds of projects can bring a lot of employment to the state of New Mexico. The same will be true when Rio Sol transmission line gets constructed in a couple of years that basically parallels that SunZia line. You'll have thousands of people employed doing this. So those skilled trades, we have a guy in our office is leading an apprenticeship program and started that at CNM, got the support of CNM, but went to him and said, we need more linemen. We need more kids being exposed to this. And I think some of the work that Fayth is doing, it sounds like, is really going to help with this. But those folks can make hundreds of thousands of dollars a year without a college degree. And you have access to those things just at our community colleges, for example. So lots and lots of opportunity. Probably nowhere in this sector can you find a gap of need.
So I'm hearing a developing theme of developing, attracting, and retaining talent. Thank you for those insights. All right, so lots of dimensions. So Fayth, this next one, let me ask you to talk about, and you mentioned limited bandwidth in a different context, but here, given the reality of limited resources, limited bandwidth, because that's a resource, our time, right? What key strategies should emerging coalitions adopt to stand out and secure long-term funding and commitment? And that commitment is just as important as the funding, I think you'd agree, specifically from private companies.
Absolutely. Well, I think the elephant in the room that no one wants to talk about is that we have an administration change coming. And a lot of these monies that we have gotten used to, we don't know. I mean, if anyone in this room can predict what is going to happen in the next 4 years, you do not belong here. You need to belong somewhere making a lot more money, because I can't guess. None of us can guess, right? And so in my mind, private companies can be the solution, right? For longevity. When the federal dollars either don't come in or they run out, the private companies can help bridge that gap. However, Monday and Tuesday, I was in Pennsylvania with another one of my clients, a mid-size oil operator, Coterra Energy. Coterra's external affairs team, not including myself as a contractor, is 3 people. And we were like war room planning for 2025. We laid out all of the partnerships that they have. And just in the trade association and chamber, grassroots coalition category, we were north of 50. They operate in 4 states, and they're 3 people managing relationships with 50 different organizations. That doesn't include the universities that they have partnerships with. It doesn't include the grassroots advocacy programs that they fund and support, the government relations work that they do, right? So private companies, they have a lot on their plates already. So why would they choose another consortium? Why would they choose to support another organization when, man, like each one of those poor 3 people is managing a lot, right? So we started working through, are there ones that we need to cull? Are there partnerships that are no longer beneficial? And what are the questions that we're asking as we're doing this? The very first one is, what do they need from us? Do they need time, money, expertise, all of these things, right? Because it's much easier to write a check and not give any expertise, right? We can write the check and get that done in 5 minutes. However, with only 3 people, granted, Coterra is a large company. They have a lot of subject matter experts that we can engage when we need to. But in terms of managing all these relationships, we don't have the time to give to these organizations. We're all serving on many committees and working groups and all of these things, right? So as we're looking at this like ginormous list of 50 that feels like we can't ever tackle it, who stands out? Which of these consortiums, which of these associations stand out and provide value back to us? Because at the end of the day, the private company they have to move forward. They have to send money back to their shareholders. And so who is helping them do that, right? As we talk about starting these consortiums and organizations, I mentioned a little bit of doing the landscape analysis and seeing what's out there, seeing if you can put your weight behind something that already exists. These companies do the same thing, right? I'll bring it back around to Petal because I am representing them today. For me, I think that the unique thing that Petal brings, besides the advanced energy research for the Permian Basin, because that's kind of like the diamond, right? The other value things are we're covering 2 states. There's this like invisible line that has 2 very separate community landscapes on either side of it, but they sure can look across the border and see what's going on at their neighbors, right? So number one, Petal can help bridge that gap, right? Spread things out, make things a little bit more equal so there's not as many of the disparities. And for good or, good disparities, bad disparities, we're trying to level that out. The other piece of this that I think Petal can really emerge as an offer, any company or any organization that's trying to do community benefits planning, like this is brand new to all of us, but Petal has community benefits planning experts on the team. So we as an organization, we want to help you with your community benefits plans. We want to help you be a better community partner. Because, you know, the advanced energy research, that's huge, right? The immediate value for a company that has research they want to deploy, like that's right there. But the other things are the workforce development. They are the community benefits that we have. This is a very large, PEDAL's a very large consortium. Amelia can probably correct me. It's like 7 universities. It's both national labs, right? We have the experts on our team to help with all of that. So as a private company, what is the value proposition? It can't be arbitrary, because in that list of 50, anyone that's got an arbitrary value proposition, they got to go. And it's not personal. It's just, we can't do it, right? And so building these coalitions, building these consortiums is a good thing, but we have to have a good value proposition behind it to continue to receive private funding and make sure that these continue in perpetuity and don't die on the vine.
So important. But one of the things that I was struck by, very important, is it's not always, it's easy to write a check, but what you need is people's time.
Correct.
And commitment. And, you know, and that's why I said earlier that it's not so much, you know, our funding, it's the commitment from the people in the coalition that matters. So, okay, we do want to save some time for audience. So I'm going to ask each panelist one final question, but I'm going to ask you to be super brief so that there is time for the audience. And that question is, and we've touched on them, but just to summarize as what you've heard, what factors are essential to making partnerships sustainable over time, whether in terms of resources, organizational commitment, or strategy? I know, just quickly summarize those points so that we could sort of use that as an encapsulation of this panel and go to audience questions. So let's start in reverse order. Matthew?
Yeah, I think part of it is understanding what some of the misconceptions are. People think industry doesn't care. It doesn't matter what industry it is. People just think industry does not care. These are the jobs of tomorrow. Those jobs are not here today. And if you want to do them, you're going to have to go somewhere else to go learn about it. We've got the higher ed institutions here to teach our kids how to do these jobs. There's already great organizations like San Juan College that is tooling these kids for things like hydrogen, tooling them for things like carbon capture. So these are not the jobs of tomorrow. They're the jobs that kids are learning today. That's one. And then the other part to that is, again, that industry doesn't care. Doesn't matter if it's oil and gas industry, the coal industry, the solar industry. You can find a headline that makes it out to be that those industries don't care. People think of oil and gas, they think of J.R. Ewing and they think of Dallas, and everybody must be like that. When you talk about the oil and gas industry, it's guys that look like me working down in the Permian Basin, providing for their families for the first time in their family's history. They have brought their family out of poverty. We leave that part out of the story all the time about what energy and what these opportunities bring to communities that are really disadvantaged. In New Mexico, about 40% of our kids are being raised at or below the poverty level. So we've got tremendous challenges. If we get them into these career paths and we tell them these jobs are here, you don't got to leave the state. You can get these jobs right here, and you can do that. We can make sure that, one, we're building the pipeline, but two, we're clearing up the disinformation that's out there, that industry doesn't care, and three, that I'm leaving out my last point. I'll just move on.
Matthew, good summary. Jolante.
In terms of bridging gap between the available energy technologies that we have today and deployment, the continuous engagement with communities is very important. The research projects that we work on, the DOE research projects, they're also always limited term, maybe 3 years, maybe they're being extended, but then there is a gap. So the industry could play a role here in the continuity.
Fayth.
The problem with having Matthew and I on a panel together is we can be here for like days. We'll just, we're endless. No, I think as we really kind of figure out, we can't be a solution in search of a problem, right? We need to do our due diligence, look at the landscape. What are the problems, the bridges we need to solve? Matthew's laid them out here for us. We've talked about them, and I think we're going to continue talking about them over the next day and a half. those are the problems that we need to solve. And so if we want to live, forever, right, the organization has to be flexible, but it has to adapt to what the problems are now and not create a solution for a problem that doesn't exist, because in my opinion, that is spelling the death of the organization for sure.
Great. Great points. Laurie, you get the final.
Sure.
Shall we go?
So I think I talked about this a little bit earlier, but trust, I think what Matthew said is exactly right. I think it's just people. And I think we are so polarized in our society. We're using headlines and clickbait to make determinations about people's intentions or their hearts. And that's not really the case. I think when I sit down with advocacy groups for Indigenous people, when I sit down with advocacy groups for environmental, I think they want the same thing I want for my children and for my family and for the state. So finding ways to, again, identify that common ground and make sure that you're being honest about it. I think Fayth said it really well, which is be realistic about what we can do, but also know there are details. I think any really complex problem, whether it's education, healthcare, energy, the reason it's not fixed and perfect is because it's nuanced and it's complex and the solutions are difficult. So to have patience with each other, to find and seek understanding and common ground, I think is really critical in any of those kinds of areas with that complexity and money at stake.
Common ground. So true. And we do have far more in common but we tend to amplify the differences and forget about what's in common. Okay, so thank you. For those are sort of the structured questions. And how about, do we have any questions from the audience? There's got to be some questions. Or everybody really wants to go to lunch.
Yeah.
I have a question for Fayth. Using the example that you talked about with an operator, as let's say a case study, what did you guys identify as key attributes that would help you move forward with the company and why?
Sure. Well, this is a little bit hard to answer, right? Because it depends on the state and the area. And what are the challenges that operator is facing in that area. New Mexico is where my focus comes in. So I'll use New Mexico as an example. We're keying up for the legislative session. And so we're thinking about who are the organizations that have helped us move legislation forward in the past that was beneficial or helped us editing and modifying legislation that maybe was not helpful to the organization. So really what we're looking at is how have they supported us in the past to address the challenges we have, right? And if there are some organizations that are simply goodwill, right? You're always going to be a part of the organization because it's just the right thing to do, and that's okay. But really what we're looking at is, did that organization help us solve a problem that we were facing in that specific region?
I like the idea of evolution. Transition really is more of a negative term. It is divisive. It's saying that what's happened in the past is not good. We got to make a change to the future, and that can't happen that fast. Evolution, on the other hand, is a very encompassing, it's a very exciting word. And so I would challenge everyone in this room here that let's get rid of the word energy transition and let's start using the word energy evolution. And let's start changing our attitudes to being more of a half glass fill, more of a exciting and where we're going to go. Not saying that what we're doing in the past is wrong. We got to take all what's in the past and we got to evolve it. And so I really love your word of evolution. And I think that that's what we should start be doing. And we can start that change just here in New Mexico with this workshop, because evolution is exciting. That's what the kids are going to grab hold of. They're not interested in transitioning. They're going to do what they want to do. But evolution is a different word. And we can find these kinds of words throughout this whole process, that just one simple word can change the whole concept and the whole idea of bringing communities and people together. So that's not only change from transition to evolution, but let's see where else in our whole different fields we can do that.
And words matter. Yes. Matt.
Can you hear me? Okay, perfect. I just want to respond real quick to that. So, and that's exactly it. When I worked for the Farm Bureau, we were working on an issue called the Healthy Soils Act. And in the language, it's talked about climate change. It immediately gave our farmers a knee-jerk reaction. As soon as we changed that term to climate variation, which is the exact same thing, and they've been talking about it for generations, it made them comfortable with it. So words do matter, and finding words that are inclusive makes such a difference.
And just generally, and this is one place, words matter, language matters. Next question.
Yeah, I have a question. So we discussed about how to avoid getting duplicative efforts. So if you look in the agenda, page 2, we have different type of partnerships that were statewide in New Mexico. So one led with the S Corp and UNM. They had a lot of people. It was a NSF funding. They had about 20 million, and it was great until the funding stopped. And then I'm trying to find out what's happened. You have another one, the Northern Rio Grande Collaborative. So it's a bit different, but it's the same player. It's a whole the university in New Mexico, the national labs, and they are looking for funding. There was a COVID, it stopped. So we have some of the players of this collaborative if you have questions. But so we have a lot of partnership developing, and we have a lot of technologies. Like we have a partnership or a consortium, call it however you want, on geothermal. You will have one on geothermal district, heating district, maybe. We have one on oil and gas. We have some. We have another one on carbon storage. So how do we avoid having too much of those partnership and consortium? Can you talk about that and how we can gather all the information in one place?
I just might want to mention that, we talked about the engine, and we haven't talked about, but there was the regional clean hydrogen hubs that both New Mexico with Wish and us with Shine in Arizona. But these proposals, even though, when we don't win, it's sad and it's disappointing, it still provides pulling together teams, building trust, and having material that we can repurpose into other things. So like community benefits, workforce. I'm sure New Mexico is finding some of the same, or at least I hope so, from their WISH proposal, for example. So there's more than just money that starts to pull people together. And it's really sad when a proposal doesn't win and then it just all goes into the ether and nothing comes out of it. And there's never a reason for that, I think. So anybody? Okay. Nobody, I think, is everybody super hungry? Because we still have time for one question.
Yeah, I can continue. So I like the example of Wish. So what happened next? First, how can we find more information about Wish? What was the effort about, and what happened to the collaboration? Is it still something going? Are they still speaking together about developing hydrogen in New Mexico and the other states? Do you have information about that?
I don't think anyone on this panel was involved in WISH. Probably some people in the audience.
So that's my point is, I hope with this consortium we can get a place where we can find information about what happened and what's happening and all this effort, because I would like to have more information about that.
Well, I can't speak for WISH, but I can. I mean, one of the, I guess, things with WISH is they stood up a separate entity, and I assume it went away. One of the things we did in Arizona, it was our first and biggest project that we did in Arizona. And so since we still have the center, all of that material and all of that know-how and all of those relationships, we've been able to sustain despite not being selected. So nobody want to speak to WISH? Is it the case that nobody in this audience was involved in WISH? Because by itself, there's a.
So we tried to, but there was no follow-up.
Okay, sorry about that. All right. So with that, I'd like to, unless there's another question, It is lunchtime, and I would like to thank my panelists. I think fantastic insights, and I hope you agree.